Before we start the show, I'd like to thank the sponsor for this episode, Pitbull Tactical. Pitbull Tactical is the creator of the Universal Mag Carrier. The Universal Mag Carrier fits all mags from 9mm to 45 ACP, single or double stack, with no adjustments necessary. You can mount it ambidextrous, right or left-handed, inside the waistband or outside, and there's no screws or adjustments necessary. It's ready to go out of the box. I actually have two Universal Mag Carriers myself, and I've got to say, they're pretty awesome. They're super comfortable, and they fit my mags nice and snug. The Universal Mag Carrier is made right here in the USA and has an overall buyer rating of 4.5 stars with over 1,400 reviews. With Pitbull Tactical's 100% satisfaction guarantee, you can return your Universal Mag Carrier with no questions asked for a full refund if you're not completely happy with it. For the next 2 weeks, Pitbull Tactical is offering a giveaway just for listeners of this show. So if you head over to psi.chat/giveaway, you can sign up for your chance to win one of 5 Universal Mag Carriers that Pitbull Tactical is going to be giving away over the next couple of weeks. Now, don't fret if you don't win. If you listen all the way through the end of episode 7 of the Public Safety Innovators podcast, where I interviewed Jeff Brodsky from Pitbull Tactical, he's going to give listeners of this show a special 15% off coupon code that you can use. A big thank you to Pitbull Tactical for being the show's first sponsor. If you're interested in sponsoring the show and getting your name in front of our rapidly growing audience, please head over to psi.chat/sponsor. We'd love to consider having you sponsor a show.
Welcome to the Public Safety Innovators Podcast. Connecting you with experts and trendsetters who are leading innovation in law enforcement, private security, and personal protection. And now, your host, Adam Wills.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 10 of the Public Safety Innovators Podcast. Today, I'm going to be speaking with Angad Singh from Pix4D. Now, Angad is going to share with us the genesis of how drones have become used and the evolution of drone usage in the law enforcement setting, and some of the really awesome, cool things that you can do with drones, specifically using their software Pix4D Mapper, which allows you to fly a drone over a scene, traffic accident scene, or a crime scene, and be able to analyze the data in such a way that it can be stitched together by their software to create and render a 3D virtual environment of that scene that you can go back to and look at any time, as well as to be able to take very precise measurements within the software of that scene. So we're going to talk about some really cool stuff with that. We're also going to talk about some other case studies and things that are being done around the country that are really innovative with the use of drones. We're going to talk about why the drone technology and scanning a scene and rendering it in this software is a better technology than some of the stuff that we've been used to using, like laser scanners, things like that. So I look forward to you joining me in this episode with my interview with Angad Singh from Pix4D. Well, Angad, welcome to the Public Safety Innovators Podcast. It's really good to have you on today.
Thanks, Adam. I appreciate being here.
Yeah, so I'm really excited about this episode. I love talking about drones. I'm certainly not the most knowledgeable about them, and I tend to crash more of them than I actually successfully navigate. But it's still a really exciting topic because nothing to me epitomizes the idea of innovation in law enforcement than adopting drone technology. So today we're going to talk about your company, Pix4D, and how you guys are helping public safety industries, as well as some other industries we'll talk about, adopt drone technology, implement it into their day-to-day uses and be able to capture drone imagery, then convert it to a 3D environment. Is that right?
Yep, that's correct. That's what Pix4D does, and that's what I'm helping bring to the market.
Awesome. So let's talk about the adoption of drone technology. Now, law enforcement is not exactly the most well known all the time of adopting new technology in a quick manner. We tend to be rooted in our tradition, and we've talked about this on the show in previous episodes with Anthony D. Molina of Tactical Drone Concepts, and we talked about this with Scott Savage from Savage Training Group, that we get so rooted in our tradition and just used to the way we always do things that we tend to be slow in the uptake of new technology.
Sure, I've heard that a lot from folks out there in public safety. However, I've seen a pretty consistent adoption rate since this technology became commercially viable and available as something that I consider to be easy to adopt. And so I think that comes down to public safety has a lower tolerance for risk, meaning that if you have a tool, you need to know that that tool works because you're going into different situations, right? It's not the same situation every day. It can be a very different situation, even though it's maybe in that same environment every day. And so you need to trust the tools that you're utilizing. And I think that in some ways is a safe way to adopt technology, that you see other folks utilize it, you see and you learn from other folks' failures, maybe in different verticals or different agencies, and then you adopt it yourself. And I think that actually is a safe way to adopt the technology. And so it's not bad. We've seen a pretty good adoption rate, so I've been happy so far.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. It's almost using social proof as a means of taking that risk and adopting the new technology or the new idea. So it's not just about the risk of adopting the technology itself, but we're talking about public perception here as well. And we're using taxpayer dollars to try these new things and try these new ideas and technology. And if it doesn't work out, we potentially have the backlash to face of the community saying, well, why did you spend all this money on something that we now can't use, right? And so there's a different level of responsibility that comes with being part of a publicly funded organization versus in the private sector. And so I'm assuming that that's a big part too, because you probably see higher adoption in private sector.
We have seen higher adoption in private sector so far over the last couple of years, but I would not discredit the amazing adoption rate in public safety through North America and the way that we've seen it in the last few years. I know that some of the most successful programs that have started using drones and mapping software like Pix4D provides, they're using discretionary funds or they're using Caesar dollars. So it's not necessarily coming from that standardized budget that's coming from the taxpayer, but sometimes when you get this, surprise bag of money, then you can utilize that to test out the technology. And if you have agencies that test it out and are successful and they share those stories with the world, then other agencies can say, hey, now that risk of money, that financial buy-in that we're going to do to get this new technology, it isn't considered as much of a risk anymore because we've seen success from other agencies that have done it. And I think that's one of the best ways that I've seen public safety work. And that's been one of my personal strategies as well, is that areas where we have influencers, areas that we have, a warming up of the adoption rate, those areas are a lot easier to get hotter because you can pump effort into them and you can say, hey, this one individual at this sheriff's department is doing all these amazing things. And you share those stories with folks at adjoining agencies, and they trust that information because they know that guy. They know where he lives. They know his what the geography that they're dealing with every day is. And we've seen that actually provide a pretty consistent pattern of growth for drones in public safety across the board.
Yeah. And then it just grows and swells from there. And I mean, I've been involved in that myself, and you're absolutely right. That is exactly how it works in the law enforcement industry. I assume around the country. I mean, I know certainly where I'm from here in Colorado, having been an administrator of a law enforcement agency here, that was exactly the way things worked. I mean, we used to get together. We had a 7-county judicial district, and on a routine basis, usually monthly, all the chiefs and sheriffs, undersheriffs would get together in one place at one time to meet as a region And not only to talk about what's going on, but there was always sidebar conversations of, hey, I'm looking for a new body camera technology, or I'm looking for this, or I have this problem. What are you guys doing to resolve that? And we would all share those ideas and bounce them off of each other. And, usually there were certain key agencies or people that were more influential than others, right? So when they made a decision to adopt something, everybody else looked at that and said, that's the thing for all of us to do. That's the pillar, if you will. And so that social proof is absolutely, it's powerful and it works. So I'm glad to hear that you discovered that golden nugget and how that works, and that's been a successful tactic for you. Now, I know you've been involved with drones for a long time. You've been steeped in it, if you will. And so I'd like to see if you can take some time here to tell us, from your perspective, what does the evolution of drone technology look like? Where has that started? Where has it brought us to now? And then how does that correlate on the timeline with its adoption in law enforcement, private security, fire, and other public safety type industries?
Yeah, absolutely, Adam. I think that's a great question. And when we look at drones and we look at the evolution of this technology, these drones, these small quad-copters that we think of today that can cost roughly $1,500 and then make their way up from there, they're not actually developed from the innovations of the aerospace industry with the big drones that the military's been using for the last 20 odd years. But the reality is that these small quadcopters that we're adopting in public safety have actually been developed out of the cell phone technology, out of smartphones. The drone is a flying camera, just like your cell phone is this camera that you walk around with every day. And to get the flying camera to operate properly, we needed to have GPSs that were really cheap and small. We had to have IMUs and accelerometers and these little tiny plastic parts that were cheap and small. And now, because they're being produced at such scale, because everybody in the world, for the most part, has a smartphone now, when we reached economies of scale with cell phone development and cell phone manufacturing, the drone industry was able to take those small bits of plastic and take those smaller, cheaper cameras and now build a flying robot that works with it. And so the reality is, as cell phones became super popular in the last 10 to 15 years, drones have been built off that. And now in the last 10 years, that's what we really considered the drone industry to be. 10 years, the first 5 years from the early 2010s were when these things were coming out and they were considered just tools, and YouTubers were buying them and Hollywood was starting to adopt them. And then really about 2015, we saw enterprise, meaning, oil gas companies, mining companies, land surveyors, as well as public safety, look at these drones and say, wait, that's a tool that I can take advantage of and that will make my life easier and safer and better. And so really the last 5 years since 2015 towards today have been when we've seen adoption into public safety. I would say that in 2015, we had the super early adopters, the guys that were taking technology that was not built for them, but repurposing it for themselves. And then in 2016, we saw them writing use cases and saying, this works, we can do this. And then in 2017, I started to see more agencies picking it up and finding those influencers that had been in it for a year or 2 years. And then really 2018 was the year where we started to actually see money coming into it and seeing public safety drone-specific conferences pop up around the country. And then 2019, last year we saw a lot of adoption. We saw regional groups start. In California, there's multiple regional groups of, like you were saying earlier, Adam, groups of chiefs and deputy sheriffs and et cetera, who are getting together and saying, hey, this is what I'm doing every day. This is the drone model I'm using. This is the software I'm using. And then there's this group called Drone Responders that's led by former Charlottesville Fire Chief Charles Warner. And so when Chief Warner retired, he said, we need a group for the world that will develop training and develop standards for drone adoption into public safety. And that's what Drone Responders has kind of positioned itself as. So now we even have national groups that go and sit with the FAA and sit with leaders of public safety and say, how can we standardize the workflows and the routines so that everybody can grow together?
Yeah, that's a really interesting background that you share on that and the genesis of all those things. It's interesting to me, and I'm fascinated by the fact that you shared how there's this misconception that drone technology, in this case, the quadcopter, was adopted from military technology, because it is really different. And I wonder how did we get to a point where the industry was referring to them as drones rather than quadcopters? Because really, truly, a drone is an unmanned jet aircraft that the
Yeah,
military uses. So
exactly.
why was that term applied to these quadcopters? Where did that come from? How did it get adopted? And now we're kind of stuck with it, right? What are your
Yep.
thoughts on that?
So we're definitely stuck with it, and we're not even just considering we're stuck with it, we're rolling with it. I would say in 2016, there was a big effort to change the name of these quadcopters away from drones. When the government writes white papers, or when academia writes white papers and academic papers on this subject, they usually use the acronym SUAS, Small Unmanned Aerial System. And it is properly a system, right? I mean, you can have a UAV, which is the actual unmanned aerial vehicle, or the drone itself. But when we refer to the whole thing, it's a system. It's a small unmanned aerial system. Now, you have plenty of folks out there that will say, what's our SUAS budget? Or, there's out of California, there's a newspaper or an online media blog called SUAS News. We really tried hard to get away from using the word drone. And then I think by 2018, the industry realized that we just got to call it a drone. Because when you stand up on stage and you say SUAS, nobody knows what you're talking about unless they're in the in, right? And the general public's like, what's an SUAS? And so now we just call it a drone.
Yeah.
Everybody's given anybody that goes on stage
once it gets adopted as that, you're kind of stuck with it, right?
Exactly.
So, we've talked now a little bit about the evolution of the drone itself. Let's talk about the exact problem that we're facing here, or that law enforcement agencies, public safety agencies are facing, and how you're helping them overcome that. So I'm assuming that at its core level, really the problem is inefficiencies in investigation processes, as well as safety of officers in the field. And so I guess tell me about that. Unpack that problem. What is it, and what is Pix4D set to do as a software solution to help resolve those problems?
Sure. So, Adam, when you say inefficiencies, all I'm thinking is time, right? When we say inefficiencies in an investigation, I think of time. When we say, inefficiencies in traffic officer safety, when a road is closed, right? The longer that somebody's standing out there on an open roadway, that's inefficient, and that decreases their safety overall, right? I mean, that's why we see so many, traffic officers or just, folks out there telling traffic where to go who actually get hit by oncoming traffic or are, injured in that line of duty. That inefficiency comes down to time. And I think that's really what the drone is solving, is it's increasing the speed at which we can do stuff. So when we go to, let's talk about like collision reconstruction. This is probably the most important single application for me and for Pix4D as a company. And that is, you have a typical 2-car collision on a 2-lane road. Depending on where the vehicles are sitting at rest, you may have to open one lane, to allow traffic to flow, or you're closing it down completely. And when that's happening, everybody's pretty pissed off, right? I hate waiting in traffic. It really pisses me off. So here, you take out the older school technology of, a roller tape or a metal tape or a laser scanner or a total station, and it can take an hour or 2 hours to record all the evidence on that scene, to record the tire tracks, the gouge marks, where all of the vehicle parts lay at rest. And now with a drone, I can fly that drone over that scene in 15, 20 minutes. It takes a bunch of photos, and now you've collected your digital evidence. You've collected the photography of that scene using that drone, using that flying robot, and then you can clean up the road and move forward. Right there, that's the inefficiency of using a technology where you have to have the scene right there in front of you and you need to record it. Whereas with the drone, you can record it from the air quickly with the drone, and then our software, Pix4D software, will take all those images and turn them into a highly accurate 3D model as well as a 2-dimensional map. And that can be done in an office. So all the processing of the imagery into that 3D model, into that 2-dimensional map, is done in an office outside of the roadway when the road has already been cleaned up and traffic has gone back to normal. And that's the first inefficiency is right there. Let's get the road open faster. Let's get guys out of the road quicker because you can use a drone to record the scene in 20 minutes or 30 minutes. And I think that's really, really one of the key components of this is time. And now if we look at probably the second most powerful application, and maybe the application that I think personally every human out there should want their public safety agency that's local to them to have a drone for, is search and rescue, right? I mean, when you have somebody that's out there, a lost hiker or a kid that's gone missing, you got to find them. And that's actually an application where time is truly of the essence. And we want to find them quicker than we don't want to find them, right? If the drone's in the air and it's searching, right, you can put it into a grid pattern. So the drone will fly a automated grid pattern, just like if you had a group of volunteers doing a line search. Now that drone is taking photos from the air, looking down in a line search or grid search pattern, and that's systematically searching your whole area. So then you can look at a 4K, or a high definition TV screen and make this image super large, and you can look at it and you can say, hey, that kind of looks like the corner of that kid's jacket. Or here I can see some tracks through the snow that I know are not, deer or bear tracks. That looks like a human was lost there. Let's go inspect it. Let's go check it out. And that's really where I think drones are making big waves, is decreasing the time so that I think officers can then increase their time doing other tasks, like focusing on the investigation itself rather than the collection of the data to then do that investigation.
Yeah, I mean, the applications are many, and you've listed a couple of the major ones there, but I mean, there are also so many more. And I think that just the ones you listed make it apparent that it's an obvious technology to adopt, right? I don't see why any law enforcement agency wouldn't want to. There's obviously other barriers in place that maybe people are struggling with in adopting the technology, whether that's money or approval from their governing authority, city council or whatever that may be. But it's obviously an effective tool. And I think as an additional efficiency that I'm thinking of here, just as you're describing these uses, I can't tell you how many times that I have gone to a scene, mapped it out by hand, right? And we're not just talking about traffic scenes here. I'm also talking about outdoor crime scenes, right? And how many times I've been to a crime scene and sketched it out and, collected all of our evidence, photographed everything, and then went home and went to bed and had this epiphany of, oh, shoot, I should have taken a closer look at this particular space or this spot or this area, right? And so we've all been there, done that. And I think the huge benefit here is the ability to go back in virtual space to that scene and be able to look at things again and identify, is there something I overlooked that we didn't see when we were there the first time? And that's huge. That's unparalleled to me as an advantage that this technology offers.
Exactly, Adam. Exactly. You get to revisit the scene. That's why we call this a digital twin. This 3D model that we're making with the drone photos and software like Pix4D is a digital twin of reality, where now exactly what was in that exact moment when the photos were taken, we have a fully realistic 3D model that you can revisit. And now let's take this idea and let's take it an even step further and look at the overarching long-term strategy, which is not always something that folks really think about. It's like, okay, the benefit of today is that I went and flew my drone and I captured all that photography, and now I can make a fully realistic 3D model to actually revisit that scene, do my investigation right there. But now what happens when we have 50 scenes or 100 scenes, or in the future, thousands and thousands of scenes that are being captured with this type of data? Well, we can use it for training. And I think as VR and as AR technology gets better and we can get these VR headsets, we're going to be putting firefighters and policemen and policewomen and soldiers through VR headsets where the realistic scene that was the reality that was captured by the drone and produced in that 3D model is now the base environment that they're using to do training. And so if you have an outdoor crime scene and you have this 3D model of what it looked like, what that carnage looked like afterwards, we're going to put it in the VR headsets, 5 years down the road and have folks train going through that. And so now you have people that are pseudo more wise because they've seen a scene 100 times in a VR headset, where in reality, they may only get the chance to see that once or twice to then train. What are we looking for? How do we react better? How do we investigate better? So what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting futuristic look at what the capabilities are of this. And that's something I didn't think about. But I mean, you're absolutely right that there's that opportunity there to really create scenarios, if you will, that you can drop someone in to say, all right, tell me how you would resolve this scene. Right. And I think that's huge. I didn't think about the training aspect of it. That's a really unique idea. I love it. I love it.
And I have buddies in the drone field, right? That we have our tech companies, et cetera. And this is kind of the stuff that we're looking at for the long term, because we know that this will just be a win-win for everybody. And I think that a lot of folks are not thinking about the long-term effects of the technology that we implement right today. And that's definitely one of the long ones. And it ties back to what you were saying earlier, where what are the actual hindrances of technology adoption? Well, for someone like me, I think I suffer to think about what those hindrances really may be. But that's why we need other people out there that are definitely like thinking about the doomsday of the tech, because there's always unintended consequences. It's just like our cell phones today, right? We have these kids that keep scrolling on Instagram. And sure, when the like button was developed and when social media came out, it was like, wow, these are all win-wins. But now we realize that we've actually changed the fundamental brain chemistry of how some of these kids' brains are developing, because they sit at a phone and have constant, dopamine feedback loops all the time. It's the same thing with innovation in public safety, that there are definitely going to be some unintended consequences of new technology adoption. And sometimes I actually am grateful for slowly adopting stuff, because then we think about it more and we can see and correct behavior that may have negative long-term consequences, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually want to unpack that a little bit, because there's a program out there already that I think is very futuristic in its application in using drones. I love the concept, but I also think, to tie back to this conversation that you just started, that there are a lot of potential, or there is a lot of potential for unintended consequences going forward. And I don't know exactly what they are, but I think we're going to see them. And so that program, I'm assuming you know about it, is the Drones as a First Responder program with Chula Vista PD in California.
Yeah, absolutely. Chula Vista actually has Pix4D as a software as well. I know.
Well, there you go.
Yeah,
that's a good plug.
Yeah, Captain Vern Saleh, who was over there, he just moved on. Now he works for Axon as one of their drone public safety experts, and Fritz used to be, he's at Skydio now, which is another American quad-copter drone company, and Fritz really helped that program develop at Chula Vista. So yeah, in the drone industry, we revere Chula Vista as a fantastic example of what could be.
Yeah, and before we talk about that program here, because I want to discuss what that is for anybody that's listening to the show that doesn't know about it. Now that I know that you have connections there, I might ask you to put me in touch with somebody, or if anybody on the show is from Chula Vista, or who's listening to the show is from the Chula Vista Police Department. I've reached out to them a couple of times. I would love to have somebody from the Chula Vista Police Department on the show to talk about that program, because it is the epitome of innovation. And so far, my requests have gone unanswered. So I might be not reaching out to the right people, but I would love to have them on to talk about the program.
I'll help you with that. I found that the Chula Vista guys just get so inundated with requests because of how
I'm sure
how public their program is. I'll help you out with those connections. Don't worry about that, Adam.
Yeah. Awesome. I appreciate that. That'll be a good follow-up to this. We've kind of unintentionally started a drone series here on the Public Safety Innovators podcast, between episode 3 with Anthony DiMolina talking about tactical drone concepts and what they do. But now, that led to talking to you, because we talked a little bit about Pix4D in that episode. And so that led to this conversation with you, which hopefully will lead to the conversation with Chula Vista PD about the Drones as a First Responder program. So I wonder, I was going to kind of summarize what that program is, but I think you're a lot closer to it. I know you're a lot closer to it now. So maybe you can actually summarize for us, what is that program all about? What are they doing and why is it so innovative?
Sure. So this is my basic understanding of it, and know that I am not the expert on this subject at all. But the idea is that the drone is the first responder, meaning the drone shows up on site first. So if they get a call in, they have a knowledge of where that call is coming from, and then the drone will go to that location automatically. And yes, it has to be with some perimeter of where the drone is being launched from, etc. But the idea is that you get the drone in the air and you start recording that scene immediately from the air. So you know that, okay, you get a domestic dispute. Well, now there's a drone hovering over that individual or that family's home, recording everything. That guy's less likely to run away. You know, you have a traffic collision or a hit and run, and suddenly a drone is, looking at you from the top. You're less likely to leave because now you're under surveillance and the video's there. And I think that that's kind of one of the most innovative programs out there. But it's also something where you get a lot of critics too, right? Because of the privacy concerns. I think one of those unintended consequences, like we talked about earlier, and this is definitely something that affects, Pix4D as well, is that now you're taking imagery of something. You're taking video of something. What if you capture another crime in that imagery or in that video?
Yeah, that's a good point.
And you prosecute on that? Was that a violation of somebody's privacy? These are all considerations as well that we have to take seriously.
Well, I mean, I'll tell you my opinion from a semi-legal standpoint, just based upon my knowledge of things, but I am not an attorney, so I'm not giving advice, just disclaimer. But I would think in that scenario, I mean, it's open in public space, right? And it's the same concept as if you have other surveillance cameras in city environments and that sort of thing. You capture a crime in progress that wasn't the intended target of your surveillance. Of course, it's still prosecutable. You're in the public space, and anymore, like it or not, and maybe this is part of the reason why I live out in the boonies in the middle of nowhere, because I enjoy my privacy and I don't like invasions of it. But there's cameras everywhere. Everywhere you go anymore, you have to assume that there are cameras. And that's sort of the thing that law enforcement nowadays are dealing with anyway, that they have to assume that everywhere they go and everything they do, regardless of just their body camera, they're always being recorded. And the public is the same. And so I guess those are some of those unintended consequences, right? I mean, we're changing the field of what privacy looks like in policing going forward, and how that pans out, right? I mean, one of these drones captures a crime in progress that wasn't the intended target of the surveillance. What do you do with that, right? And ultimately, the courts are going to have to figure that out, and we're just going to have to see where that goes. Not to be a conspiracy theorist, because that's not where I'm going with this, but, it makes me think back to, I love the Terminator movies. The Terminator movies are like my favorite series, right? Yeah. And now I'm thinking of like drones showing up, deploying RoboCops onto the street, right? Yeah. Before the human cops get there.
That's basically what Chula Vista's program kind of is like. It's a baby of that, and that's why these movies are.
Oh, be careful now. We don't want to start.
Exactly. What I'm saying is now building on that, right? And I'm being careful here. Don't worry, Adam. Is that?
Yeah, we don't want to blame Chula Vista for the end of the world here.
No. We have a great program, great folks out of there, really nice people, but with hearts in the right place, But the thing is, for those like guys like myself in technology that are bringing this technology to market, thinking about it, taking the feedback from our end users and building it better and stronger, we need to watch these doomsday movies because it makes us think about those consequences more, so that we can more wisely understand the world around us.
Hey everybody, just me popping in here for a quick break. I want to thank you first of all for listening to the show. It's because of faithful listeners like you that we have now far exceeded over 4,000 downloads of the show, and that we're able to bring in really awesome guests on the show. So I'd like to ask you to please share this show with your friends. And most importantly, please go and leave a review wherever it is that you listen to the Public Safety Innovators podcast. Those reviews help all of those different podcast directories, algorithms, to display this show to other people like you that may be interested in listening to it. So please go ahead and head over to psi.chat/review. And I've made it super easy there for you to leave a review on iTunes, Podchaser, and Stitcher. So please head over to psi.chat/review, and then let's go ahead and dive back into the show. Back to the Chula Vista thing, and I'd give a use case there. When we were talking on episode 3 with Anthony DiMolina, we talked about a scenario that they had there where they had received a call about somebody in a park with a handgun. And they had their drones showed up first and were able to identify that it was actually a lighter that was shaped like a small handgun. And, they saw him pull it out and light a cigarette with it. And so, of course, the huge advantage there was that the responding officers that came to that scene were able to respond in a very different way than what they probably would have without that information. And so, we see yet again in this scenario a different application of drone technology where it's helping to increase public safety as a whole, but also officer safety, right? Those officers are not going in amped up thinking they're about to end up in a deadly force scenario. And the public is safer because of it, because they're not going in thinking they're about to end up in a deadly force scenario, right?
Yeah. Exactly what you just said is why that story is told so many times at conferences and through the media, is because that is a brilliant story of what this technology can do. Because we know that, that is something that the public is concerned about right now. And a story like that can really quell some of those fears or make the situation safer for everybody involved. And I think that's one of the key components of technology like drones, right? Same thing when we're looking at collision reconstruction. We want to make it safer for everybody involved. And yes, you need to investigate that collision. You need to investigate that accident. You need to collect data so that you can go back and measure the gouge marks, measure the skid marks, see where all that evidence lays at rest. And so you fly the drone over the scene, you take all those photos and make that 3D model. And now it's made it safer for everybody involved because they can do their investigation when they're in a calmer place in an office rather than out there in the real world where there's traffic buzzing by.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, since we kind of got started on discussing case studies here, I'd love to hear maybe some other case studies or stories that you're aware of, not necessarily with Chula Vista, but just in general, other clients, other customers, if you will, or the law enforcement agencies that are utilizing the Pix4D software and how they have successfully adopted drone technology and are using it in a way that has solved cases or saved a life, whatever. What do you have on that?
So I think that one of the people that I really look up to is Bill English. He's the senior investigator in charge at the NTSB, or the National Transportation Safety Board. And for example, Kobe Bryant's helicopter accident was mapped with the drone and Pix4D Mapper. That horrendous event with the outdoor crime scene in Las Vegas, the largest crime scene in American history, with the shooting at one of the casinos, that was mapped with Pix4D so that they could go back and revisit the scene as a digital twin or a 3D model. And so we've seen that Pix4D has been used a lot. Yes, there's all across the country. I know that Washington State Patrol is one of the largest drone programs in the country today, and they really only use drones for mapping collision scenes. And that biggest advantage is that you get a fully realistic model of what the scene looks like, and you can clear the road faster. So I think it's an innovation on the collection standpoint, but also I know that you know this from your work and in your experience, Adam, is that when you go out there and you mark different things on the ground and you mark evidence points at a collision on the ground, as a human operator, as a person doing that, you could miss something, right? I mean, when you look through a polarized pair of sunglasses to try and figure out where the end of a skid mark starts and begins, every collision reconstructionist or accident investigator out there in the real world, it's an interpretation. How long the skid mark really is. Where does it start? Where does it begin? But if you have it on a 3D model and the pixel shows that, okay, this is the roadway, and then it gets a bit darker on the next pixel, that's a lot more scientific and a lot more transparent of a method of measuring that skid mark than somebody doing it on the ground when they're stressed out because you have traffic going by and the road has to get open. And so,
let me ask about that here real quick too. I mean, I assume this is in large part more dependent upon the actual technology of the drone and the cameras that are being used, that are chosen by that law enforcement agency, more so than it is your software. But I'm wondering, like, what is the accuracy level of these measurements? Like, are we talking feet, inches, millimeters? What does that look like?
We're talking centimeters, half an inch, quarter of an inch. So,
okay.
So just like when we look at collision reconstruction as a science, and we see that 15, 20 years ago, we had survey technology, start to be used. So laser scanners, total stations, which are super high precision, laser-based measurement devices that can sometimes cost $50,000, $100,000. And this is typically what large state agencies and larger collision reconstruction programs are using. These were survey technology that then collision reconstruction folks adopted. It's the same way with drones. Pix4D Mapper, which is our flagship solution, which is the software that the majority of my collision reconstruction clients buy, it was designed as a survey tool. So we have land surveyors, Department of Transportation, state agencies, civil engineers using Pix4D Mapper to create survey grade 3D models that they can then do civil engineering design work on top of. So if this technology can be certified by land surveyors who have to stamp it with their personal license saying, yes, the accuracy or the tolerance of this data set is X, well, it's the same way with collision reconstruction guys. They go and they make their model and they do an independent check of the accuracy, which means that the software tells them the accuracy, but you need to check it yourself, meaning that usually you go out and you put a tape measure on the ground, or you take 2 survey points across the roadway, and so you know the exact measurement there. Well, you just compare that to what the software processes, and then you can tell that as the accuracy. So I know that was a little bit long-winded of an answer, but basically, yeah, we can give you half an inch, quarter of an inch, depending on how you follow the workflow and what you collect in the field. And in terms of equipment that folks are using to do this, most of the time they're using a drone that costs $1,500 or $2,000, and there's really only 4 or 5 good options on the market today for this application, and most of them have 20 megapixel cameras. So we've also started to see a general standardization of the equipment that's being utilized across the board. And definitely the software is pretty standardized. I mean, Pix4D is really the only player in this that's being utilized heavily. And so you get a couple different models of drone, one software that really folks are using. And from there, if we can standardize the equipment and I can standardize the training, then we can really make sure that the accuracies and the workflows are also standardized. And that's good for everybody across the board, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you could have just responded with, yeah, it's really accurate.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate that detailed explanation because, for the guys and gals that are listening to the show that are traffic investigators, I am not, I never have been. I was the guy that tried to avoid going to traffic scenes as much as I could. But for those folks, because most of them have a very mathematical mind.
Yeah.
You really have to in order to be a traffic investigator, an accident investigator. So for them, that explanation that you just gave, I'm sure is really beneficial and will mean something to them. So thank you for that detail. Let's put ourselves in the shoes, or actually I should probably say in the boots of this traffic investigator who's utilizing a drone to map their scene. So now they've finished mapping the scene, and they collected their photographs, their data, and they're going back to the office. Can you kind of describe for us and help us visualize what is it like to use the Pix4D software? So what are my next steps when I get to the office? How do I take the data that I've collected and put it into your software? What do I then have the options to do with it? And how do I interact with it within your guys' program?
Sure. This is the typical workflow that somebody would follow in the field. You arrive on site. you secure the scene, you say, okay, there's my vehicles, this is the vicinity I need to map, and you connect your drone and you put it on the ground. And then before you take off, this is what you're going to do. You're going to go and you're going to put what I call a reference measurement protocol on the ground. That means put down an independent, a tape measure. Put a tape measure down so that you have some proof of the actual measurement accuracy. Then you go back to your drone and you connect your phone to it and you load up our app. It's called Pix4D Capture. You can use any app on the market. There's quite a few different ones out there. But basically, it's just going to pull up a map or a satellite image of where you're sitting at, and you just draw a square around the area you want to map. And you say take off. The drone takes off, and it automatically flies a grid mission, or sort of like that line search pattern. It just flies a grid mission or a lawnmower pattern over the scene, capturing a photo every second or so. So that means that now, for a typical collision scene, we got like 150 photos. And then the drone lands. You just check that on the SD card of the drone that the photos are captured, that they're clear, they're in focus, they're not blurry, and that's the field work. Then you go back to the office or you open your processing laptop and you put all the photos on the computer, and then you go into Pix4D Mapper, or we have other software too, but most folks are using Pix4D Mapper, and you open up the software and you import your photos, you give your project a name, you tell it that you want your project in feet rather than in meters, because we're here in
yes, please.
States. Yep, exactly. And then you just press start processing, and it'll go through. And what the software is doing is, and I find this fascinating, right? I mean, some people it's too technical, but the software goes through every single photograph, and it calculates what's called a key point. So a key point is a texture or just an independent point in that photograph. So imagine if I took a picture of a white wall, there's not going to be that many key points because it's a blanket white wall. It's super boring. But if you took a picture of a wall that has blood splatter, or a roadway that has lines and debris and different color and stuff, it has more texture, or it has more stuff going on. So then basically we find the exact same point in one photograph, and we find that exact same point in other photographs around it. So that means that I can see one point on the ground from maybe 10 different angles or 10 different photographs that were taken in the air. And then the software triangulates where that one point on the ground is from all the photographs. And that's how we're able to construct this highly realistic, highly accurate 3D model of exactly what that scene looks like. And then from there, once you have this 3D model, we just make the 2D map based off of that. So that's
cool.
Yeah, it's a little counterintuitive because a lot of times people think you make the 2D map and then you make the 3D model. But the reality is, to make an accurate 2D map, you first have to make the fully realistic 3D model, and then just set all the Z-axis pixels to 0, and that becomes your 2D.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I would have made that assumption as well, that it was the other way around. Yeah. Well, let me put you on the hot seat here, On God. I gotta point out, you guys don't have a monopoly on software for creating these interactive for mapping out footage captured from drones. So there's other options out there in the marketplace that maybe some of those that are listening to the show that are interested in deploying this sort of a program in their agency. There's other programs that they might be evaluating or looking at. So why Pix4D? What makes you guys different? Why are you better? Why should they choose you guys?
There's 3 things, and there's a reason that all of the state patrols that have a drone reconstruction program use Pix4D. That includes, Washington State Patrol, the largest drone program, Texas Department of Public Safety, Colorado got started, we got Vermont, we got Pennsylvania, we got Virginia, we got North Carolina is a really big, high-profile one. Shout out to Trooper Brian Leventhal, my good buddy down there. And so there's a lot more too, right? There's a lot more after that, North Dakota, etc. Oregon as well. Billy Bush out there is a great guy. But the reason that we have all these departments using Pix4D is because, quite frankly, it's the best software on the market. We make the most accurate 3D reconstruction. Now, of course, you can say that and it can be the best, but now let's go into 3 reasons of why that's the case, and why Pix4D. One of them is that we have desktop-based software. Most of the folks that have software that takes images, turns them into 3D models, they use the cloud, or the software sits on the internet on an Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure or Google server somewhere. And a lot of folks are concerned about CGIS or, CGIS, Criminal Justice Information Security, and they don't want to send their active evidence, their digital evidence, to the cloud. So since Pix4D is really the only one that has desktop-based software that's affordable, that's, I think, the number one reason is because it's desktop-based software. It's local. You control your data the whole way through. We can't see what you're processing. It's sitting there on your own machine. And if you have like a bunch of dead bodies in a data set, that's probably a good thing. And then on top of that, I think it really comes down to training, right? This is new technology. It's a new vernacular. It's a new way of thinking. You can't just put a software out there on the market and then expect people to adopt it. You have to teach them how it works and explain to them that. And I think Pix4D has done a lot of work investing in training. I used to teach the classes. I used to travel around the whole country teaching departments, teaching surveyors, giving lectures, etc. And having a dedication to getting the word out there has been very helpful. But even more than that, if you Google any question related to Pix4D, for example, go out there and Google getting started with Pix4D. We have over 800 support articles and YouTube videos and all this other stuff that's free information. That's how I learned this technology. Before I joined the company, I was, doing academic research, looking into machine learning and drones and the science of remote sensing, right? And I learned this software by watching all the free YouTube videos. And then I was hired by Pix4D. But
YouTube University.
Yeah, exactly. You got to give free information, right? You got to teach people how this stuff works. And so those are sort of the reasons of why Pix4D. There are competitors in the space, but most of them are cloud-based. And the ones that are desktop-based are either incredibly expensive, not as accurate, or not from like a friendly country.
Got it. That was a very PC way of saying that. Nice job.
I hope that's a thank you.
So now you started to talk a little bit there. You shared a little on your background. Why don't you kind of give us some more? Like, how did you get started with drones? How did this become an interest to you? And how did you end up with Pix4D? And what does that genesis look like?
So Pix4D is a Swiss company. We're based out of Lausanne, Switzerland. Now we have 7 offices in the world. We got Tokyo, Madrid, Berlin, Denver, Colorado. We had one in San Francisco that I used to work out of, and then now I'm technically out of Denver. And so it's a Swiss company, and it really started about 10 years ago out of our CEO, Dr. Christoph Streccia, out of his postdoc work, so his PhD work at this university in Switzerland. And I was studying in university, and I was doing academic research in a science called remote sensing, which is basically analysis of satellite imagery and analysis of images in general. And I kept reading these papers, and people were talking about drones, and they were saying, yeah, you can make these geospatial data sets, these data sets of the world around us, 3D models and whatnot, out of drones. And I was like, this is going to be the future. Like, these things are so cheap. I mean, for $2,000, you can get a drone that can capture data that's higher quality than an airplane with a $100,000 camera could, 20 years ago. That's a significant innovation. And so I said, all right, this is it. This is what I like. And I started doing research with it. I started flying farm fields, doing analysis of crops. And then I did an internship where I worked for a drone company in Asia, and I got to go and, fly in the middle of a desert or go into the mountains and fly a survey of a mountainside that had never been surveyed before with a drone. And these were the early days of drones, so they would crash a lot, and create these data sets, right? And then I, finished up my schooling, and I went and I decided that Pix4D had the best software on the market, and I wanted to work for them. So I reached out, and the individual at the time who later became our managing director in North America, a guy named Paul Spar, who's an amazing guy. Actually, Adam, he could be a super cool guest for this for this podcast. But Paul,
send him my way.
Yeah, for sure. Paul was a paramedic, and I had a brief stint working on an ambulance. I'm Indian. I thought I'd be a doctor, so I worked on the ambulance. And so then Paul saw that, hey, I was like a drone guy now with remote sensing and this strong background, but I'd also worked on an ambulance like him. And obviously he'd been a paramedic, a flight paramedic, so he had a long career, and I had a very short stint in the summer. But he liked that, and he invited me out for an interview, and then they flew me out to San Francisco, and then they were like, yeah, this guy's got it, so they hired me. And Paul was doing all the public safety engagement. And when Paul got promoted to the U.S. managing director, he needed somebody to go out there and be on the ground with departments. And he felt like I was the best person to have those interactions in the company. I mean, my dad's a former special forces operator, so I've been around guys with that sort of mindset. So I do a lot of the DoD work and I do a lot of the public safety work. And I, quite frankly, just like being around people and chatting with people, and I'm a super frank, honest guy. And I think that's helpful when you're working in this space. So when I explain the tech, I don't just tell you how good it is. I also tell you where you're going to screw up and what's bad and what are the limitations of the technology. And I think that sort of honesty has been helpful for me so far.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is really important when connecting with especially the decision makers in law enforcement. Well, I appreciate you sharing the background with me. This has been an awesome episode so far on God.
I appreciate it, Adam. Thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah. Anything else you wanted to cover that we didn't do so up to this point?
Really, folks out there that are listening to the podcast, right? I mean, it's all this technology. It's all this new language, this new vernacular. The easiest way to learn about it is from me or somebody like myself to tell you about it. So you can reach out to us, and you can put my email in there if you want. It's ungad.singh at pix4d.com. And I pretty much just talk to different departments all day long. And that's what I like to do, and that's what I'm helpful at. And so that's something that's really important, is just never being worried or afraid to reach out and have a conversation and learn something new. And in public safety, we're seeing a great adoption curve of technology. Right now, the biggest hindrance is that DJI is the most popular drone company. It's a Chinese company. And the thing is, they've recently been villainized or scrutinized by U.S. government and other global governments in regards to information security of the data that they're capturing. And this is something that we really just need as an industry to figure out, because there are other options when it comes to drones, and those are becoming more popular now because of the information security concerns. And I think once the U.S. government puts out proper, laws or regulations on what they need for information security from a drone, that's going to allow the industry to go full steam ahead. I mean, it's a little bit of a hiccup, but it's not a really big hiccup, right? I mean, for the software side, from Pix4D's perspective, we've had an awesome year. I've talked to so many different departments and set up so many different departments and done webinars with guys, collision reconstructionists, Office of Emergency Management. We built this software called Pix4D React that's super easy to use. I priced it really, really low because I wanted everyone to have the ability to access it from a price standpoint. And it makes maps really fast. And we've seen that used in hurricane response, tornado response, before someone delivers a warrant, or sometimes for a hot wash after the warrant delivery. We've seen departments fly and just create quick maps of that outdoor scene with the drone. And so the application and...
Yeah, that's an excellent use too.
Yeah. We've really seen some amazing work. And I know that I had a conversation about 3 years ago now with a captain from Alameda County Sheriff's Department, who I know in California, that I know pretty well. And I asked him, "Sir, what do you think when you compare drones and mapping software to other innovations?" I said, "Where does this compare?" And he said, "Ungad, the drone is as powerful as when we got radios." And think about every single department has a radio.
That's a big statement.
Yeah. So that for me, that meant that, wow, there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of growth to be had. And that kind of pumped me up and kept me, keeping my head down and trying to help people.
Right on. Well, why don't you tell us how folks can connect with you and Pix4D?
So you can send us an email. It's just us.sales@pix4d.com, or go on the pix4d.com website and file just say contact us and fill out the form. If it's public safety related, you're going to hear from me. You can also just email me directly. Ungad, ANGAD.singh, which is SINGH, at pix4d.com. And I am more than happy to talk to anybody.
Awesome. And I'll go ahead and provide those links in the show notes down below, along with some links to your guys' social media and your website. And specifically, I was looking around on your website under the public safety stuff. And I saw a couple of really cool resources on there that I'm going to share in the show notes as well. One of those was a webinar on using the Pix4D Mapper for collision reconstruction.
Yep.
And the other was an actual example of a digitized accident scene. So I'm going to go ahead and put links to those in the show notes as well so people can check those out.
Yeah, that would be super cool. I appreciate that, Adam. You know, when in this whole journey of technology adoption, we've had awesome times doing these webinars. I've got to do these webinars with real boots on the ground guys. And I think this year, a lot of work has gone into figuring out the nighttime workflow. So mapping in the dark. And we have a lot of guys doing that. So
awesome. Well, OnGod, thanks for being on the show. It's been awesome.
Adam, I really appreciate it, man. And congrats on everything that's happened in your life recently. And thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, anytime. Hey everybody, thanks for checking out this episode of Public Safety Innovators Podcast. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please head over to my website at publicsafetyinnovatorspodcast.com or simply psi.chat, where you can check out episode notes and other episodes from the show. While you're there, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or really anywhere else that you prefer to listen to podcasts. I would greatly appreciate if you could help other people find the show by leaving a review wherever it is that you prefer to listen to the show. I'd love to hear from you if you have feedback about the show, a suggestion on a guest, or maybe you're a public safety innovator yourself and would like to be a guest on the show. Please head over to my contact page on the website and you can submit that information there, or just email me at adam@psi.chat. All right, I'll catch you on the next episode.